is create engaging rehearsals. Again, seems obvious, and how would you do that? Well, in my opinion, it has to start and finish with you being an engaging person. In the same way that if they're bored sight reading, it's because you're boring. If they are not engaged in rehearsal, it's because you're not engaging them. That is something that is your responsibility. And here are some insights that I'd like to give you on being an engaging person. There are some of you out there, and I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but maybe you're one of those kind of introverted personalities that it's very hard for you to um, to be exciting, right? To get up in front of a group of people and just pour out energy. That is easier for some people than others. It's a talent. It's one of the things that makes a great conductor, is whether or not a person in the choir stares at that person and just can't look away, right? That is an important part of it. And I don't know that I can teach that to you, with the exception of this one thing: learn to be yourself. A person, no matter how their personality might present to the world, is more interesting to other people, is more engaging to other people when it seems authentic. Okay? So I'm going to illustrate this with a story. When I was a practicum student, so a young undergraduate, we all did it, where we had to go out into classrooms, and it was pre-student teaching even. So I think I was probably third or fourth year undergrad. I did 5 years for undergrad, so third or fourth year, somewhere in there. And this was going to be my first time in front of a choir, of a high school choir, where I was in charge of leading the rehearsal. Okay, so I'd interacted with kids up to this point, but I had never been the one who's in charge of the rehearsal. This was going to be my first time. And one of the assignments that we were given for that project was that we were supposed to bring, and I'm going to date myself here, a VHS camera and record that rehearsal. So I did. I think it was some madrigals. I was rehearsing some madrigals, and they were in Italian, if I remember correctly. And the assignment for that videotape was to take it to a trusted advisor slash mentor slash more experienced teacher to watch the video with them and get feedback. Somebody who we believed would give us honest feedback. So I chose to take it to my high school choir teacher, to Steve Perry. Some of you might know him. And Steve, this is the second time I've told a story about you on this podcast. I apologize, but you kind of are responsible for creating this monster, so you might have to deal with it. So I take the video to Steve, and of course the fantasy in my mind at the time was that Steve would watch this video and he would just be so overwhelmed with pride for the progress and the growth that I had achieved in my young life since I left high school and had gone to college, and look at all the fancy words he's learned, and look at all the historical knowledge that he's learned, and look at how much of his conducting gesture is blossoming, right? So in my head, all these things, this is surely going to be how he responds. He's just going to gush with pride from watching this video. And he didn't. He watched the video, and his first response was, "Chris, I was so bored watching that. I wanted to tear out my eyebrows." And I was crushed, right? I was none of the things that I was hoping he would say. He said it was his first and biggest reaction was how bored he was watching that rehearsal. And it was a kick in the pants, but I needed to hear it. And I went back and watched the video again with his feedback in my head, and I went, "Oh my goodness, he's right. That's a horrible rehearsal. If I was a teenager in that rehearsal, I don't care about learning the word hemiola and what it means. Like, I want to have fun, and I want to be engaged. I want to be not preached at, but I want to be interacted with." And I was doing none of that. I was hiding behind my music stand and lecturing in between attempts at rehearsal. And it just wasn't interesting. And the other bit of feedback that Steve gave me in that project was that it was to turn it around on me and say, "Chris, in your normal life, you are funny and you make dumb jokes and you're goofy and you're smart, but you say things in a way that's unique to you." And I didn't see any of that in this rehearsal. So I was looking for the real you, and I didn't see any of that. And that was extremely a formative experience for me. I think back to it all the time when I'm seeing young teachers kind of stumble up on the podium, is I'm waiting for them to figure out who they are and how to be that person on the podium the same as when they're off the podium. Now, here's why that's so important. So for a rehearsal to be engaging, in a lot of ways, it has to do with pacing. It has to do with the time spent singing, getting feedback that is helpful and that is constructive, and minimizing the amount of time that takes so that the next bit of rehearsal can start, so that they're like thinking about that video game again. They're always thinking about the next thing to do. So the problem is, if the music happens and you as the conductor are not able to be yourself, then you're going to hear the music. You're going to have to filter what you say through the character of someone else that you are playing, rather than responding as you. Okay? Now, that's just going to slow you down. And a slowed response time between singing and instruction / getting back into the singing is the surest fire way I've ever seen of killing a rehearsal, killing the vibe in a rehearsal, killing the pacing of a rehearsal. And so here's a quick tip, especially for you young directors. In your head, every single time that you are singing, this is slightly a tangent, but every single time you hear the choir singing, there are 3 things at minimum, especially when you're starting out, that should be spinning in your head, ready to come out as soon as they're done singing. What do I say if it exceeded my expectations? It was just amazing. And their attempt was way beyond what I thought it was going to be. How am I going to respond? And how am I going to respond immediately when they're done, so that they feel the joy that I feel, like in that moment? That's one possibility. Door number 2 is they're about at where I expected them to be, meaning I had an idea of notes and rhythms they might miss. They missed them. I had an idea of vocal technical things that they might have had problems with. They had the problems, but for the most part, it was a good attempt, right? And that elicits a different response, and it again has to be ready as soon as they're done singing. And so they get that next thing to do, because even though it was what you expected and you're proud of that attempt, you get that positive feedback, they're ready to go on. And then there's the third response, which is that it did not go well. And they need to have some kind of an immediate feedback of not being punished, but immediately so what about that attempt was not successful, and what little small piece of that attempt can we go back and try again and try to scaffold it and build it to be a more successful passage of music or whatever it is that we're trying to attempt. And so I throw that tangent in there as advice I give to student teachers and to young teachers all the time, and through the lens of being yourself. Because if you have, that's a lot to think about, right? For a young director too, especially where you're reading the music during that attempt and you're trying to figure out all the stuff that's going on, and to still have all of those ready plug and play responses ready every time they sing something, that's hard. And if you're playing a character that you think you should be in front of them rather than your authentic self, it's going to be really, really hard to do that. So that's a long one. And that's a lot to digest, so feel free to reach out with questions on that one. But I think that's probably the most important aspect, is the number 5. Like I said at the beginning, I have not ranked these in any kind of way, but that might be the most important one, is creating engaging rehearsals by being engaging. That ultimately means being yourself.